The interrogation room had no windows, which Tavia Sarin had decided was a deliberate psychological choice and not an architectural accident. The Keth Directorate was methodical about everything else. She doubted they had forgotten to include a window by mistake. She was 19 years old, sitting across a table from a Keth Tribunal Officer for the third consecutive day, and she was not signing anything. The exclusion zone, the officer said, is marked in every navigation registry in this sector. Your vessel entered it without a permit, without a declaration of passage, and without a valid commercial charter from the Directorate's licensing board. These are not disputed facts. We had a navigation failure, Tavia said. I've explained this. You have stated this. A statement is not an explanation. The officer, she had started thinking of him as Slate, because his skin had that quality and she needed to call him something in her head that was not his actual designation, which she could not pronounce, set a document on the table. You will sign a declaration of intentional trespass and accept the standard remediation period. 7 of you. The process is efficient. Tavia looked at the document. The remediation period was listed at the bottom, 4 standard years, to be served at the Directorate's resource extraction facility on the second moon of the 6th planet in a system whose name she couldn't read. No, she said. Slate collected the document without visible frustration. He simply left, the door sealed behind him, and Tavia sat in the windowless room for another hour before they took her back to the holding area. The ECS Marginal Dawn had been a civilian survey vessel, 12 crew, contracted by the Hareth University of Applied Sciences to chart reef world geology in Sector 6 Tau. Tavia had been the communications apprentice, 6 weeks into her first deep space posting, when a single cracked coupling in the navigation array's tertiary guidance block had propagated through the system in under 4 minutes. The autopilot had steered them 2 degrees off course and directly into the Keth Directorate's exclusion zone before anyone realized what was happening. Lieutenant Commander Osa had brought them in on emergency thrusters, setting them down in a long, tearing strip across a salt flat that went on for 6 kilometers and ended in a cloud of dust and silence. 5 of the 12 survived the landing unhurt. 2 more survived with fractures. They lost 5 in the hull breach and decompression on entry. 7 survivors. Tavia had counted them twice in the dust cloud aftermath. The Keth patrol had arrived 19 minutes later. She had been at the emergency beacon at the time. The ship's primary comms array was gone, but the beacon unit had survived in its hardened housing, and she was trying to get a burst out before anyone stopped her. The beacon's interface was cracked and half its frequency selector wheel was sheared off, leaving her a narrow range of the dial she could actually reach. She keyed to what she thought was Coalition Standard Emergency and fired the burst. Then the Keth patrol came over the ridge in 3 ground vehicles, and she had no time to check whether it had gone where she intended. She found out later that it had not. The frequency she had actually broadcast on was 3 Omega Chaplain. It was not a coalition frequency. It was not a standard emergency frequency of any kind. It was a holdover from Earth's early deep space fleet, a dedicated humanitarian band that chaplaincy services had used to coordinate relief and intership pastoral care during long transit missions. The band had been formalized in 2119, maintained through the expansion period, and never formally decommissioned because the paperwork to close it had never been filed, and because Earth's humanitarian monitoring stations had continued listening to it out of institutional inertia, and some said, genuine belief that such a frequency should always have someone on it. Waystation Aurelius-4 was a resupply and maintenance station staffed by 43 people, of whom 1, a junior communications supervisor named Ren Ohashi, 23 years old, had the additional duty of monitoring 3 Omega Chaplain during the night cycle because it had been on the monitoring list when she was assigned the post, and she had never seen a reason to take it off. She had been listening on that frequency for 14 months without receiving a single transmission. When the burst from Tavia's beacon came through, she sat with it for 30 seconds before she understood what she was looking at. Coalition emergency burst. Human voice overlay partial damaged. Marginal dawn survey vessel navigation failure reef approach sector. And then a coordinate string that was recoverable. Hull registry logged. ECS Marginal Dawn, Hareth University contract vessel, last filed course sector 6 Tau, 12 crew, overdue on check-in by 6 hours. She pulled the sector chart. The coordinate string pointed to the third reef world in the Keth Directorate's exclusion zone. She spent 4 minutes confirming it. Then she flagged it to the Waystation commander and keyed the Earth Patrol channel for sector 6 Tau. In the holding area, Tavia had organized the 7 of them into a routine. They had 4 hours of exercise in the courtyard each afternoon, 1 hour of meals in the common room, and the remainder of their time in a holding block with 8 bunks, a water recycler, and nothing else. Nobody had been hurt further, but Os had a fractured wrist and pilot Dara Voss had 2 fractured ribs, both managing pain the Keth had addressed with basic medical aid and nothing more. Tavia had started the routine on day 1 because doing nothing was worse. She organized the courtyard schedule so Os and Voss got the most rest. She managed the water recycler, which had a quirk in its cycling sequence that meant you had to run it twice to get clean output. She led the evenings not formally. She had no authority to lead anything. She was the most junior person in the group, but she talked after lights down, keeping conversation going in the dark about whatever came to hand. The reef world's geology, the survey targets they hadn't reached, food, the probability calculations for how long it would take someone to realize they were missing. She did not know whether the burst had gotten through. She had no way of knowing. She talked about probability anyway, because hope was a thing you could hold even without evidence, and she had decided on the salt flat with dust still settling around her that she was going to hold it until something told her definitively to stop. Nothing had told her to stop yet. On the morning of day 4, Slate came back with a second officer and a different document. Your case has been escalated. The Directorate's senior tribunal panel will convene in 9 days. You will remain in holding until then. He set the new document on the table. This is a notification, not a request for signature. What changed? Tavia asked. Administrative reclassification. She looked at the document. The senior panel had authority to extend the remediation period to 12 years for cases involving commercial survey vessels in protected zones. 12 years was not a number she allowed herself to sit with for very long. I'd like to file a statement of navigational emergency, she said, in writing through whatever formal channel exists. You have made this request 3 times. I'm making it a 4th time. Slate looked at her with the flat, patient quality she had been studying for 3 days without being able to read. Then he said, "The form will be provided," and left. She had no expectation that the form would matter. She filed it anyway. What Tavia did not know was that the EPS Wren had dropped out of transit 2 hours outside the exclusion zone on the morning of day 3, moving fast. The Wren was a fast diplomatic courier, Earth registration, carrying a full humanitarian operations team, and a legal officer named Cass Petrov who had a reputation for knowing exactly how many treaty articles to cite before the other party's legal staff started looking nervous. It had been rerouted from a supply run after Ren Ohashi's flag reached the Earth Sector Coordination Desk, which matched the Marginal Dawn to the Keth Directorate exclusion zone, and immediately noted that the Directorate was a signatory of the Humanitarian Conduct Charter of 2247, a multilateral agreement covering civilians in distress, specifically including persons whose entry into restricted territory was the result of navigational emergency. The Charter's Article 6 required signatory parties to release persons held under trespass protocols if they could demonstrate navigational distress at entry. The Keth Directorate's tribunal process did not include an Article 6 review. This was, in Petrov's considered opinion, a paperwork problem she was qualified to solve. The Wren had also transmitted its rerouting notification to the Coalition Sector 6 Tau Patrol Desk, which had resulted in the Coalition cutter ECV Threshcannar being tasked as an escort, not because Earth asked, but because the Coalition's liaison office had looked at the situation and concluded it was better to have a ship there. 2 ships. A legal officer whose plan nobody questioned, and a cutter commander who had said, when asked what the plan was, "Whatever Petrov says." On the morning of Day 5, a young Keth communications officer came to the holding block and told them there were ships in the outer exclusion zone requesting communication access. "Which ships?" Ozai asked. He read from his notes, EPS Wren Earth registration, then a Coalition cutter, 2 ships. Ozai raised her good hand. "That's me." He led them to a communications room. The connection was already live. Cass Petrov, who introduced herself with her full title and registration number in a tone that made clear this was not a social call, said, "Lieutenant Commander Ozai, we have your crew's location. Are all 7 members accounted for?" "All 7, Ozai said. "Good. I'm transmitting a formal Article 6 notification to the Directorate's Tribunal Authority right now. Confirm for the record that the Marginal Dawn's entry into the exclusion zone was the result of navigational equipment failure." "Confirmed. Navigation array failure, cracked guidance coupling, tertiary propagation. Pre-failure diagnostic logs are still on the beacon housing." "Sufficient." Petrov was already typing. "Under the Charter, the Directorate has 48 hours to comply with the release procedure. Based on the preliminary response from their treaty office, I'd expect it to be faster." Tavia was standing in the back of the communications room, watching Petrov work through the screen, the legal officer moving through documents with the clean, unhurried competence of someone who found it unremarkable. And she was thinking about the frequency wheel on the emergency beacon, the sheared-off selector, the narrow range of dials she had been able to reach with her fingers in the dust, and the confusion, and the 19 minutes before the patrol vehicles came over the ridge. She had not known she was broadcasting on a chaplaincy band. She had not known anyone still monitored a chaplaincy band. She had fired the burst into the void because it was the only thing she could do, and she had held onto the possibility of an answer for 4.5 days in a windowless room because there was nothing else worth holding. The Keth Directorate released all 7 members of the Marginal Dawn crew at 600 on Day 6, 14 hours after the Article 6 packet was filed. Slate was present for the processing. He was as efficient and expressionless as he had been across 3 days of interrogation. When Tavia passed him on the way to the exit corridor, he paused. "Your navigational emergency claim was filed before any external contact was made. The record reflects this." "I filed it because it was true," she said. He nodded once, barely a movement at all. She had no idea what it meant in Keth. She suspected something like respect. She decided to treat it as though it did. The Wren's medical bay handled 7 people in shifts. Voss's ribs were wrapped. Ozai's wrist was set and splinted. Everyone was given water that was not from a recycler with a quirky cycling sequence, which turned out to matter more than Tavia had expected. After her own exam, minor dust inhalation and a bruised forearm, Petrov sat across from her. "You fired the burst on 3 Omega Chaplain. Do you know what that is?" "I do now," Tavia said. "The dial was broken. I couldn't reach the right setting." Petrov was quiet for a moment. "The monitoring station that caught it is staffed by 1 person on night cycle. She'd been on that frequency for 14 months without receiving anything." Tavia thought about that. 14 months of silence, and then a burst from a broken beacon on a cracked dial, and a 23-year-old on night shift who had decided that the right thing to do was to flag it and not let it sit. "Tell her thank you," Tavia said. "She'll be in the citation," Petrov stood. "For what it's worth, the form you filed on day 4 through the Keth's official channel, they did actually process it. It was in their system when my Article 6 packet arrived. It made the legal sequence faster." Tavia nodded slowly. "Good." Outside the Wren's viewport, the exclusion zone star hung steady and orange above the reef world's horizon, and the salt flat was a pale strip at the continent's edge, and the wreckage of the marginal Dawn was somewhere out there. Hull panels scattered across 6 kilometers of nothing, the emergency beacon in its hardened housing sitting in the dust, dial sheared off, frequency selector jammed at 3 Omega Chaplain. Still pointing where she had aimed it, close enough.